Hello, everybody. My name is Harsh. Excited to be here. Excited to be here with a esteemed set of panelists here to discuss governance when it comes to healthcare AI adoption. So, appreciate all of you joining today. Thank you for doing so. I know it is Halloween time. So, with that theme, we'll talk about why we should not be scared of AI and AI adoption and how we could proceed forward. Before we go into the session, I'd like to introduce the panelists. So today with me, I have Kali. Kali is a healthcare industry and a technology leader who's been in healthcare for a good number of years across a variety of large companies, starting with Nuance, um, worked with Greenway Health, and then with Zealous, which is a large healthcare fintech company, all in significant leadership roles, leading the technology platforms for the various companies. So, welcome, Kali. Prashant, who is an industry leader in healthcare, comes with a significant amount of payer background in healthcare, working for companies, Fortune 50 companies like Anthem, and he currently leads the digital data and AI practice at Genzeon. So, welcome, Prashant. And a little bit of my background. I currently head the healthcare division at Genzeon, have had the opportunity to work for payers and different health tech companies, um, and happy to be moderating the esteemed panel here today to talk about a topic that's on everybody's mind, which is AI, Gen AI. Here, I think without further ado, let's talk about why we need to talk about governance in the first place. I think it's really, really important that folks talk about governance not in context of just risk, but governance in terms of innovation as well. So when you're talking about ideas, when you're talking about how you bring ideas to the table within the organization, how AI and Gen AI need to be managed within the organization. And that's the topic we'll be discussing today. Before I get deeper into the governance itself, I'd like to open it up to the panel members for some initial thoughts. When you, Kali, think about innovation and governance and the balance that's needed in the healthcare's point of view, what comes to your mind as something that you'd like to share with our attendees today?
Yeah, thanks, Harsh. I think the biggest thing that comes to my mind is necessity. So both are necessary, and so we have to figure out how to balance them and not be worried or scared about any one or the other, right? So like the um, as age old saying goes, necessity is the mother of invention, and so innovation, and so like they are both necessary, and they are both required, and they I don't think we can live, at least proceed in the same fashion as needs of technology. I talk about this need of technology exponentially growing while the supply of technologists, technology industry is not growing as fast as the needs are growing. So that the only way to grow is the innovation in the Gen AI aspects of it. And just like the industrial revolution, this is an AI revolution, and so like we need to adopt it, but safely and securely and things like that. And that's what we're going to talk about it here.
Thank you. Thanks, Kali. That's quite informative. Prashant, your thoughts?
Sure. So to what Kali said, right? The exponential growth is the thing to underline and focus on, right? Because with AI, things are changing so dramatically. Things which were done in 5 years is happening in months now, right? And I feel the governance models are not able to keep up, right? The traditional governance models that were there. So innovation is not only from a technology point of view, but innovation from a governance point of view is also required, right? A top-down governance model, which was primarily run by government, like what happens in pharma space with FDA, might not be the model which might work in the AI space, right? Maybe we need public private partnerships here to explore governance in new light. So innovation, not only from a technology, but I think from a governance point of view, will also be required. And as we talk through today's topics, I think hopefully that will come out.
Thank you, Prashant. That's really helpful. I think one of the things I wanted to highlight, right, as in the industry we look at AI and Gen AI, one of the things we hear quite a bit about, which is the impact itself on um, the industry. And the numbers that are shared typically are, I think I recently looked at a PwC survey, which is about $15.7 trillion of potential contribution to the economy leveraging AI, right? We talk to business leaders. One of the things that's coming out is the fact that every one of them is prioritizing at least one initiative related to AI systems and Gen AI in the near future. But only one third of them are looking at improving the governance. So there is a disconnect where folks are certainly focused more on the innovation part of it, but less so on the governance part of it. And I think that's where I like to drill a little bit deeper into that, which is the context. If we can say, what's the context of the problem space? Everybody is moving towards innovation. There is a lot of hype, there is a lot of excitement about the impact we can make, but at the same time, not enough focus possibly on the governance part because as we went through the data and the big data thing, there was data governance. As we went through cloud adoption, there was cloud governance. But as this AI revolution is happening, I feel like the balance is not quite there. And maybe that's just what we are starting to now talk about. And maybe that's the reason why we are having this conversation today. So, what I like to do possibly is to go to the next slide and talk a little bit about different aspects of governance. What does it mean to every one of us when we use the word governance, right? And I think this is an important aspect, and I also like to start because it's healthcare, and I think for me it's what is ethical, what is the right thing to do, and I'd like to start with Kali. Kali, your thoughts on governance and ethics, if you can, please.
Yeah, I mean, I even wrote about this topic recently on Forbes. But yeah, ethical use of AI is going to be most important, from that standpoint. So as technologists are developing AI and starting to use the AI technology, how do we be honest with ourselves in terms of making sure that the models are right, the amount of data that we are using is we have right to use that data or not use that data, especially these days what are called the large language models can suck in a lot of data, and be very efficient at that. But is that really the right use, and is it really the rights to use that data, so to speak? Compliance, HIPAA compliance, obviously, comes first and foremost, but it actually goes beyond that, right? Beyond the ethicality of being able to use AI. Is it encroaching upon things that should be reviewed and done by human beings versus AI and things like that? And like, so there was recently about the article about somebody used AI to generate a legal briefing, and it turns out that AI actually generated its own law, in some cases. So like things like that, so because the intelligence portion of it should be very carefully. It's almost like the more responsibility the more power you have, the more responsibility comes with it, right? So that's the portion of it in terms of ethical first, and ethical use of AI is going to be very important. Fairness is important. Compliance is important. um, and the At the same time, I think when we talk about accountability measures and things like that, they don't have to be overly cumbersome, overly restrictive in terms of what we're able to do. It's just that we have to have some guardrails and guidelines in terms of how do we use think about this aspect of it. It's as simple as when first we started doing whatever it is, we used to simply write down some policies and procedures. It's as simple as that. I don't think it's more complicated than that.
Now, Kali, that's very fair, right? I think not to take away from the basic governance considerations that still exist across whatever policy or procedure or technology we adopt, that certainly does apply irrespective. It's just that the speed at which we can now consume the data and the speed at which the systems can now act based on this data is just now exponentially faster, right? Doesn't take away the need for governance, and now become more so because of the ethical considerations. On that topic, Prashant, if you can kind of look into ethics in healthcare, right? You kind of touch upon what related to healthcare would you say why this becomes a little more relevant when it comes to healthcare as an industry?
Sure, Harsh. I would like to start off with saying ethical first is such a, I mean, of the 10 topics that we have, right? Ethical first is such a interesting one because all the other pieces has the ethical elements tied to it, right? As we solve for each of them, they will impact the ethical side of the street. So from when I look at the ethical, side of Gen AI, right? And we'll come to healthcare in a minute here. But when I look at ethical, I think foundationally Gen AI is driven by the data it's given to train, right? So if the data is not good, it's like garbage in garbage out kind of scenario, right? So again, if there is bias based in the data, based in the developers who are training it, right, all that will feed into the algorithm which drives this, and many of these algorithms are not explainable, right? Explainability is low for many of the Gen AI algorithms. So because of that, it's difficult to parse out, is it really ethically appropriate? It's difficult to pass that out, and that's one of the fundamental challenges we deal with today. Now, if you take that and apply in healthcare, the impact is multitude, right? Because in today's world, when we use DALI or Chat GPT to get some information, it's invasive, right? There's no impact to a human per se. But when it comes to healthcare, when we're using Gen AI and other AI technologies to really drive decision making of clinicians or physicians, right? The example of that Kali gave about AI having hallucinations, it made up a new law, right? What if it made up a new disease, right? So, or something along those lines, right? So the impact to um, healthcare is tremendous here in terms of what it can do, right? And similarly, the making it equality, if I may say, right? Can Gen AI, um, will it create a chasm in terms of where the healthcare access becomes available, between in the broader private, in the broader world, right? So again, there are a lot of ethical considerations we have to think from a healthcare perspective, especially on data, privacy, security. All those also come into play here as we look at it. So
No, very, very valid points, Prashant. In terms of solutions, right, as we look at it, right, a lot of large problems have been solved typically with a public private partnership. There is a federal role, a state role, there is a regulatory angle to this, there is certainly public and private innovation that transpires, right? A lot of industry problems that are revolutionary in some ways have essentially transpired and resolved through a combination of solutions, right? And I think AI doesn't seem any different because we are starting to see a lot of regulatory conversations around AI and what essentially should be or should not be the role of the government in terms of regulations to address the needs of the society, if I may, given the sheer impact of AI as an industry, AI as a technology. So, to that end, maybe I'll start with you, Prashant, and then come to Kali. Any thoughts on regulatory needs and regulatory focus that now the industry is starting to say, hey, there is a little bit of a balance around. Folks don't want regulation because they think it inhibits innovation, but there is certain amount of regulation that's needed for the innovation to prosper. Thoughts and ideas on that?
yeah, so regulation and governance always a balance, right? You want to promote innovation, but at the same time not at the cost of health or other things, right? So from that point of view, and regulatory challenges or the regulation in the world of AI and Gen AI takes multitude. There are multiple facets to it, if I may say, right? One is there is a data privacy. angle to it, right? Because at the end of the day, you're using data to train Gen AI. If today we are seeing co-pilots come up for, there's a there's a GitHub co-pilot, there's a PowerPoint co-pilot. Tomorrow there'll be co-pilot for providers potentially, right? Now with that kind of a construct, right? That you're actually feeding in potentially data, patient data to train those algorithms. Now when that happens, how do you regulate that? That's a challenge, right? That has to be solved for. Now along with that, there are intellectual property kind of scenarios that happen, right? It has not happened in healthcare per se, but if you look at DALI and other some of the other Gen AI algorithms, how they're generating images, have they been trained by using paintings from Picasso and other famous paint, and now they can create similar paintings for them, or similar poems, or similar literary works, right? Similar things can happen in healthcare also in future. So again, so for me, regulation takes so many facets. There is a data privacy angle, there is a IP angle, right? There is an angle around how does the safety and quality regulation come in play based on if decisions are being made by AI for the physician, right? So there are so many angles we have to consider, and each of them are complex. It's not easy to solve, and for me, that's why the public-private partnership. I would again, I mean, as we move forward, I'll try to build on that a little bit more. I think that becomes even more important because government alone cannot do this at the pace at which is moving. You need to bring the private entities to help them with this.
That's great thoughts. Kali, with your background in working for companies like Nuance, I'm quite interested in, Nuance and now being part of Microsoft. There's such an activity that they are doing in this space. I'm quite interested in variety of thoughts on how those companies are thinking about regulation and what your point of view is.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a tough topic. Obviously, if it was easy, somebody would have already done it. But I think regulation in this topic is important, is difficult because AI can impact so many industries and verticals, horizontally and vertically at the same time, in so many ways. It's not easy to even think about that, right? So from airline industry to healthcare to everybody else. So I don't believe, I may be wrong, but I don't believe that there can be an AI regulatory aspect that we can depend on from a government aspect of it, as a large. It's not a top down approach, it's a bottoms up approach. So how do you approach that is, you almost, to our first point, from an ethical, you regulate yourself, in terms of compliance, securities, scalability aspects of it. And then you try to actually work with the thought leadership from a regulator standpoint to be able to impact change. So big, and I do believe that the each agency slash, whether it's city government, city, state, federal aspects of it, will have to do it within. So for example, Federal Aviation Administration may have to regulate AI within aviation industry. FDA, might have to do it within the pharma industry, and so on and so forth, right? So it's just not that there can be a singular government entity that we can all depend on. So because you have to be, AI, by the way, is the other big thing about AI is actually vertically deep, meaning that you have to deeply understand the processes. AI just simply cannot work with vast amounts of width. It requires a lot of depth. How do you automate a process? The process has to be understood to the nth degree to be able to understand the automate the process, and actually AI to help on. At the end of the day, it's still logical. It's just has ability to make rules and logic on the fly. That means that there has to be a need for understanding the subject matter expertise in depth, and that's why it's a decentralized bottoms up approach is the bottom line.
No, I think no one here disagrees that some regulation is needed. It's a matter of who regulates, right? Kali, to your point, self-regulation is important as well. Industries need to themselves regulate it, but at the same time, within the specific purviews of specific agencies, they may regulate it for safety considerations, as we talk about safety protocols like in aviation and others, right? I know there is an AI Bill of Rights that talks more about the rights associated with it, from a civil rights, opportunities perspective, access to resources and services perspective. So not so much regulation, but making sure it's accessible to folks in terms of they being able to benefit from AI, and that AI is sort of a utility that's lifts all boats, if you may, and not limited to very small segment of the society. And that's an interesting view to look at regulation as well, which is not just to stop things but to enable things in the growth as well. So that's I'm seeing that as an interesting view as a utility, AI as a utility coming up in the industry as well. Let's shift topics and talk a little bit about collaboration and partnership. And I know we started to touch upon that given the fact that we were talking about, hey, public and private collaboration is key. Partnerships, a lot of growth is happening within specific companies that are investing a lot in it. How do we talk about collaboration and partnership, Kali, as you see the industry evolving? As we move forward. Your thoughts on that, as on how it's happening and how it should happen,
Yeah,
if it has that.
yeah. So this is near and dear to me. There are, so for example, when big data was a big deal, everybody could run off and work on their own big data, so to speak, and it would have been okay. But in this case, it's more important to first share resources, share the know-how, not do the same mistakes over and over again. There's no reason to do mistakes that we've learned from that standpoint. I think we all as an ecosystem benefit from that. That's one. Second, there's actually no reason for me to go develop the same models that somebody else is developing, from because there are enough models, enough landscape to be done such that I don't need to relearn. Of course, I have to customize some of that stuff, but from a base model standpoint, there's no reason for that for us to be not sharing models. That's also how you actually solve ethical use. You also solve regulatory aspects of it. So it all ties together in terms of actually being, we have to share, we have to be open about it. Like it's not a closed system where it's not maybe some companies see it as a race, but it's a race for your own needs. But it's in general, human AI is not a race that one company or the other will win. It's all together, we win or we will lose, right? So from that standpoint, I think it's more important to share the know-how, share the pitfalls, share the models, share the even share ability to, right now there's even confusion on who has what models and how sophisticated are they and things like that. I mean, even there's a like a wiki or a meta AI page that everybody knows, oh, there's a model out there that, because why expend resources both from a, but human resources alone, why expend very pricey GPU CPU resources if they're not needed, if there's a model already out there, right? So this is an important one, and I totally believe that we should share as much know-how as possible in order to for the betterment and the advancement. And this doesn't, it has nothing to do with business goals and revenue and all of that stuff. That still applies as it applies today, but it's not. But in this case, we will be better off as a human race as we advance together, not separately.
Kali, that's quite amazing. I think it is near and dear to me as well. This topic, primarily as we continue to look at forming a collaborative. I think in most industries, I go back to interoperability in healthcare. And I remember how much industry collaboration happened to create the right kind of standard so that interoperability can happen. I'm thinking something similar in terms of Genzeon is looking at exploring creating some sort of industry collaborative, especially when it comes to healthcare, to create an opportunity of open sharing across all these models in healthcare, right? So I think on the same topic, Prashant, if you would kind of expand upon collaboration, partnership, but also stakeholders. Who are these stakeholders who are beyond collaborators and partners, patients, family, society overall? Can you kind of just expand upon that? Because I'm quite interested in us taking a broader social view to this beyond public-private partnership as well.
Yeah, so I want to just double click on that partnerships before I go to the engage, because I think they're connected, right? So again, I think I hinted it on this earlier, right? Traditionally, it has been a command and control structure from a, oh, if I look
Correct.
at a macro level, right? FDA, I keep using that example. Now, to Kali's point, it's going to become decentralized, 100%. That's the only way to do it, right? Because at the end of the day, the technology companies are at the forefront. They can act faster than the government, uh, identify issues faster than the government. But there is some, obviously, some checks and balances that has to be there, which the government will provide to do this effectively. Now, but as we do this, the risk that we run into is it could again become a closed box between the large companies and the government, right? Where does a common man have a say, right? That's where the stakeholders part come in, right? So stakeholders, you have to look at it from a multitude of factors, right? There is a stakeholder, obviously, the I said government and uh, I mean the large entities or companies, right? There are hospitals who can be the payers, insurance providers, or but along with that, patients, caregivers, even to a degree, if the patient centered design that you have in a way brings out that, because as you design an AI application, you are thinking about all the stakeholders who will engage with it, right? So that engaging stakeholders and patient centered design for me like goes hand in hand, because as we are creating solutions and applications for using Gen AI, right, identifying and engaging those stakeholders so that that feedback loop is built in properly to mitigate bias, to ensure that things are done ethically, comes to forefront. So again, so engage stakeholders has to be looked. New definition of stakeholders really has to be created for this, where we look across the spectrum, because again, as Kali made the point, impact is so huge here, and it's sometimes difficult to understand where the impact is until after it happens. Um,
No, this is helpful, Prashant. I think you started to connect a variety of these governance topics here. I think, which is, not only we're talking about collaboration, engaging stakeholders, and patient-centered design. It starts to talk about how we design systems so that the feedback loop and the governance is in the system itself to some degree, and the bias mitigation, the feedback loop of saying, hey, this answer was not correct. Hence, there is something that needs to change in the model, right? So something has effectively been solutioned by an AI or a Gen AI solution. But if the answer is incorrect, the feedback loop is sort of a governance as well. On that topic, I want to shift to bias mitigation, right? Because at the end of the day, in every system, bias exists because the data is biased, right? Then you could argue the algorithm could be biased, right? Or how we train the systems is biased. If there is no feedback loop, is it sustaining the bias versus not sustaining the bias? Prashant, if you want to go deep a little bit into the bias before I go to Kali, I would like to kind of go. I think you were on that train of thought there, and I want to kind of pick up on that because I feel like bias is such a large part of how we should think about AI and Gen AI, because hallucinations is what we hear about, right? We hear about, hey, this is happening today, the data is accurate, but tomorrow the data ends up becoming inaccurate. How does that even happen? And what are things we should be considering and thinking about doing in the way we design systems?
so I think everything starts with data here. So if there is inherently bias in the data, it will show up in the algorithm, right? Obviously, you can put checks and balances for that, right? So let me talk about the different stages where bias will enter the process, right? And second is for each entry point, there has to be some kind of checks and balances that has to be put in, right? So first is data. So where data, there is some has to be filtering mechanism. There has to be controls on what kind of data is fed to a training in the training process, right? That's the first step, right? Now, at the same time, one thing you see in the industry is labeling of data so that the algorithms understand what the data is about. Who labels? Humans do, right? Now, so apart from data, our biases, the person who's involved in labeling the data, their biases also come into the algorithm, because if it's labeled incorrectly, the bias is going to come in, right? So you need control from a human element there, right? Now, along with that, um, once an algorithm is trained, even in the QA, the testing phase of it, testing for that hallucination scenario which you mentioned, Harsh, how do you know, how do you identify it? So that again, so and some of those bias side scenarios are identified and you take it out, becomes important. And for that, in many ways, you need to bring that awareness, that training, right? Bias awareness training has to be brought in so that people understand how bias can happen, because many of the bias is implicit. Most of us are not explicitly, it's just the cultural notion which we have been, grown up with, comes to play, right? So that is the third aspect. The training element has to be done correctly so that the bias is addressed from that point of view. Then I would say explainable AI is the fourth part for me, because unless these algorithms become explainable to a degree, you can peek into how it works, you will not know if bias exists or not. Whatever measures you put in, still it can sneak in, right? And finally, I would say, there has to be some kind of auditing mechanism after the fact. So everything is input. We talked about what comes in, put controls over there. But after you operationalize it, there has to be an audit mechanism, some kind of QC mechanism, which constantly is monitoring of how the algorithm, because as it's running, an algorithm is running, it's also learning, right? So bias can also, in the real world operational scenario, bias can come in. So after the fact, QC or some kind of audit check is required so that bias is identified and you keep recalibrating it so that it improves.
That's very interesting. You used a word there, operationalizing the AI systems, right? And I think for me, I want to take that topic and, you know, ask Kali, as you think about, you've been in quite significant leadership roles across a variety of organizations as a part of ELT. What metrics, what things should ELT in an organization be thinking about? What are the how should they be thinking about where the risks should be identified? Who is accountable and responsible for some of those unintended outcomes? We hear a lot of news about Elon Musk and Tesla and the lawsuits associated with it, right? But somebody is at the end of the day responsible if an outcome goes wrong. Who is that? How to think about the aspects of what Prashant referred to, operationalizing an AI program. What comes to your mind as you think about being as a leader in these industries, in these verticals? How should leaders think about this?
So, I mean, one of my thoughts here, maybe controversial, but we shouldn't think about this any differently than any other technology or any other project or any other program. That's the key, right? So, the minute we make it, more bigger than what it is, the more scared we become, and the more scrutiny and the more meetings, and all of a sudden you're not doing innovating the fast enough that you're doing, right? So, how is this any different than a proof of concept being conducted by for a feature set at any of these companies, right? So I mean, like it should be just like there's a product development life cycle, there's a software development life cycle. Product owners and product managers and software engineers, like in conjunction with right boundaries, are all in charge of that, right? So, today, forget AI for a minute, keep it separate. But what Prashant talked about still applies: garbage in, garbage out, from a rules engine standpoint. That all exists today without AI being. It's just that the AI is going to amplify those by several 100,000 times, and so you have to be more careful in doing that and tracing that aspect of it. So, as an example, see today, something slips through a code, and you have to do a testing. It's depending on what the use case is, it's easy to catch. When AI makes a mistake, or when this is amplified, it's more difficult to catch, and that's why you have to have upfront. You have to just put the more rigor on your own processes. It has to be nothing to do with new process. You don't have to create anything new. You just have to create more rigor on the processes up front. Because if your product development and security lifecycle processes were working right, you would do all of these things anyway. You just have to make sure you're doing it a little bit more rigor than what you normally are.
That's an interesting thought, Kali. So, to your point, the org structures and the processes to some degree exist. There are chief risk officers, there are CIOs, there are CDOs who are all working together on a regular basis, always anticipating brand risk and identifying what workarounds exist, right? So, to your point, the structures exist. We need more rigor uh,
Yeah.
and more balance around this so that we don't let things slip through because it's a new technology, right? But more so because of the amplification effect, actually maintain a higher level of rigor associated with those processes,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, the other example would be, human being working on a automation, makes a mistake. 5 days later, you only have to correct about 50 things. An automated bot, 5 days later, you might have to correct like 5 million lines. So, it's just that amplification aspect of it, and, that needs to happen. And so that's why it's more important to test, more important to put some rigor. So again, all of these protocols exist. I don't think that there should be a new discussion at the ELT level, on, hey, what should be our new guardrails for AI. That should be the same old guardrails, just with more rigor.
No, I think that's very fair. I think I was reading recently that Deloitte has a trustworthy AI framework, and they talk about those 6 elements of it, right? Being fair, being transparent. They use the word explainable, Prashant, like you did, right? Responsible and accountable, robust and reliable, private, secure, right? All these are things, to Kali's point, we used to talk about when it came to data privacy as well, right? All of these things were as relevant then than that they are now. But I think because of the amplification effect, now just the outcome moves quite faster here. Whether right or wrong, right? So I think that's the balance. I want to go shift a little bit into as the industry is moving too fast and the growth is happening. I want to talk a little bit about education and training, right? With a lot is happening in this space so fast, right? And no matter how much time you may spend just learning, you find out there is a new model that's come up a week later, another week later, even the same companies are coming up with new models. Just the pace of innovation is so crazy fast. How should folks think about education and training when it comes to um, AI and Gen AI? And maybe Prashant, I'll start with you on that. What's your thought on education and training, and how should individuals think about it? How should companies think about it? Quite interested in the thoughts there.
So I want to start with actually what Kali said earlier, right? About how organization structures and framework really doesn't need to change, which I completely agree with, right? What comes to fore is really the tools, and the trainings for that matter, right? The new tools and the trainings which has to be brought to bear within the current structure to address the needs of the hour, right? So from an education and training point of view, if you look at, there are multiple angles here, right? That is a key part. Again, with AI there are so many angles. It's not one dimensional, it's multi dimensional, right? So again, we talked about ethical and regulations, right? So even just the awareness of the ethical angle and the regulatory angle, that awareness, that is a very important part of the training, right? Second angle I would say is the whole risk management and security. How do you think about risk and security from an AI point of view, right? That training, again, each some trainings are applied in a corporate environment. Some are, maybe the more at a public environment for the masses, right? But again, but risk management and security, understanding of the risks of AI is important, right? I think everybody should understand it if you ask me, right? Similarly, transparency. How do you promote transparency in the world in the world we live in with AI, right? How does that transparency really happen? And transparency in the space where human and AI collaborate, because that's the future really, right? Especially with, I mean, you mentioned Elon Musk, one of the companies is running is neural links, right? Looking to implant a chip in a human brain, right? Um, that's a I mean, perfect scenario of a human AI collaboration. Now, in that scenario, how do you what kind of trainings do you even bring in, right, to address those kind of scenarios which you have not even in the mainstream yet, right? So we have to think ahead in terms of how, um, new topics for training and new areas for training and learning has to come up. One final thought I will leave is on this topic is the impact assessment of AI, right? How do you, I mean, we have talked about all the data coming in, the bias that comes in, but after the fact, that the impact that happens, if you're not able to see through it, or if you're not trained on understanding that aim, that impact that AI can create, you will not pick up on it, and sometimes the biases and other things get missed. So even just training from that point of view and what the impact is also impact. Doing an assessment of how to do the impact is also important, especially in corporates. Especially in the healthcare space, where it's so the it could have the far-reaching effects on somebody's health, right? So yeah, so training, and it's one of the paramount areas.
No, that's a quite a multidimensional view there, Prashant. So thank you for that. Kali, as you touch on education and training, I'd like to also maybe ask you if you could talk a little bit about the academic institutions. There's a lot going on there as well, not just limited to the companies that are working on, right? So if you can kind of share your thoughts, what you're aware of, what's happening in the industry, would love to hear about it.
Yeah. So from an yeah, see, it's a lot going on from a private education institutions, by the way. So if you take, if you a widely popularized story about Elon Musk walking into Carnegie Mellon, like the automotive division, and actually taking a majority of the class and making it a company out of it. I mean, like, even if you think about it, even if people like brilliant people like Elon Musk have depended on these academic institutions to be able to do some of this stuff. There's a lot going on from an academic institution standpoint. I mean, at Nuance, I partnered with Indian Institute of Technology. Um, so like in India, to be able to do some of this from an academic institutions, which had the at that time it was speech recognition, but still, like, there's a lot to learn from that standpoint. And so see, as somebody asked the question in terms of what should they do to get started. One, POC, and two, see if there's actually academic institutions that you can actually partner with. You'll learn a lot in during that process. They are actually figured out, a lot of these topics have been figured out by them. They have thought through all of this stuff from an academic standpoint. Now you can actually take it and put it in your practice in your in your own company, right? So so depending on them, and actually by the way, you, us all, depending on academic institutions, is actually helpful for them too, because they get to use the practical use cases. So there's like a win-win-win scenario there in terms of partnering with the academic institutions, and there's a ton of research going on in this place. So I would say, first, do a proof of concept, and second, partner with an academic institutions that closely monitor doing the use cases that you're interested in.
No, that's very fair point, Kali. And I think, in the conversations we have had with industry folks, I think one of the things we are hearing is the sheer amount of development and academic institutions and their focus on AI. It's especially, I think, given what has come out of some of these academic institutions as models, and the, I would say, the accuracy of some of those models, that's quite amazing, which is what is leading to the industry growth. So I think a lot of what came out of the industry is actually initially was developed essentially with the academic institution. So quite a powerful message there. I want to kind of bring this to kind of bring all these different points together. I think you started to touch on this, Kali, which is, hey, how should folks think about governance, and how should the folks think about AI and Gen AI? I want to take that topic to you, Prashant, as you are talking to different industry leaders, how are they thinking about AI and Gen AI and the topic of governance as well?
Good. So I think I will go back to what Kali was saying earlier, right? The frameworks remain the same, right? This is the new technology, the frameworks are still the same. The tools might be different, the frameworks might be different, but the structure and of the organization, how, like, how it has operated before, foundationally remains same, right? And in many ways, I think the best way to is to start with experimentation, right? And in fact, tying up with colleges or universities to do some of the experimentation always helps. Start small, right? And understand the pitfalls that you have in your organization. Every organization is unique, right? So understanding the pitfalls of that organization, the data you have, what data can be used. Start small, POCs, experimentation before you scale up. So governance builds in a, you can start small in that you can build the governance as you grow, instead of typically what happens in organizations, say brand new technology, shiny technology, everybody's experimenting, and then suddenly solutions get implemented and there is zero governance, right? So again, start taking some control, starting small, making it even centralized to a degree initially, and adding those governance elements before you go into more propagated decentralized mode is one way to do it, right? And I know one, I want to just pick on that R&D element of it bit, because the the governance, I mean, as we discussed, in future will be decentralized, right? So as organization do this, I think R&D should not only be focused on building technology solutions, right, or using AI, but also R&D should be focused on governance elements here, how to govern in the new world, right? And as it is done, that decentralized model that we talked about, hopefully it propagates up so others can use it. That council that Harsh you're talking about, so different leaders can come in as they're learning, they should be able to share it so that it becomes an industry wide standard. And then it the AI governance is more decentralized, and at the same time you're innovating at company level, right? But you're learning from each other's mistakes from a governance point of view, right? So that's a framework and operational model there, which we can double click on, build on here to really scale this up for any organization.
No, that's quite helpful. I think one of the things we've spent a good amount of time talking governance, right? But not to discount the other aspect of it, right? Governance is there because there is innovation that is bound to happen, right? And the amount of impact innovation can bring. Kali, as you're talking to industry leaders and advising them, how are folks thinking about which use cases to think about to innovate, right? Governance is one topic in the back of their mind, right? The risk associated with it. But how are industry leaders thinking about how they should select possibly which topic to pick and how to approach AI adoption within their organization, right? There is so much to it. There is the governance aspects to it, but there is also possibly business impact and risk. But quite interested in your thoughts on that topic as well.
Oh boy, could we have started with that? But so that's a very, yeah, very, very tough. I think it's very tough to, maybe uh, condense it. I don't think there's one topic, by the way, because, like, I don't think many of us, even me as a technologist, know what I don't know. Like, I don't, like, I want to start using the Gen AI concept. The best thing, people know is the chatbot, obviously, doing that. But how do you decision support, elimination of manual reporting, automation, like computer vision, the natural language processing. There's a lot to it in terms of that. But I think so. There's obviously, I'll speak to it from a CTO standpoint, and I'll speak to it from a CEO standpoint. CTO standpoint, I'd like to do a POC here and there to figure out, what is actually, not there. But from a CEO standpoint, I have to have a solid business case, and I have to go after my customers' needs. So, just now, I saw an article about, backlogged processes within, revenue cycle management of healthcare. Okay, that's where I want to apply AI. I don't want to apply AI just for the sake of applying. So if I was a CEO and, Kali as the CTO comes to me and says, like, look, I have a great, by the way, I did this to my CEO, so that's why I'm able to use it. I said, we have this great chatbot idea that, that can actually resolve internal users' issues. My CEO kind of looked at me like I would look at her now, in terms of, I don't think that's the way we spend the money. No, if I go to her or him and say, oh, hey, we are going to solve one of the most critical industry challenges. How do you do that? So that's why you actually take one of those. I mean, by the way, just because you have to think about reinventing yourself. Take a challenge that was impossible 5 years ago, and now think about it from a Gen AI standpoint. Like, see if those are the ones that have become meaningful and possible. Because there are plenty of, without going into details, there are plenty of challenges that were impossible like 5 years ago that are now possible to using Gen AI, to at least to some extent. They may not be fully solvable, but to some extent. So I would say just go after so bottoms up, do a proof of concept just to understand AI, and that makes sense. Top down, look at it from holistically and look at it at tough problems to be able to solve, and that's when then you can decide, okay, which area of AI do I need to be worried about.
Now, Kali, I know I threw a very difficult topic there, but I think, based on your experience, this input that you've shared is quite helpful. So thank you for doing
And
so.
Prashant, that's also another trick. He didn't prepare for that. Does for that. Like, there's no slide, there's no background. Like, so all of a sudden he throws the curveball at the end. I mean, Harsh is doing something. Some intel AI on his own here.
That's
I
true.
appreciate Ali you sharing your insights. Prashant, on the same topic, if you don't mind, just thinking about how are you hearing about folks talking about Gen AI and how they are approaching it on the same topic, like Ali shared his thoughts. I'm quite curious on your thoughts on that topic as well.
Yeah. So I'll try to answer that quickly because I think there's a question for us in the chat. Let me quickly go through the. So for me, when I've spoken to CIOs and CTOs, right, everybody has a slightly different problem, and it's been interesting. Many of them are obviously Kali's point, business problems, right? What can you solve? And it could be, and it is linked to how a patient or a member or even an employee sometimes has to consume large amounts of information today to make a decision. How can we take all that information, shrink it down, and potentially put a Gen AI algorithm or a bot in front of it so that it becomes more of a Q&A kind of setup, right? That's the gist of the use cases I've seen, right? And it's in a scenario where a member is trying to understand their benefits, right? It could be a scenario where a clinician for a pre-auth has to look at all the documentation that the provider has sent across, right? It could be a scenario where, in a risk adjustment scenario where, you're looking at all the clinical codes and making a decision on what is the risk profile of the patient. But all these use cases, one commonality is there is that you're shrinking large amounts of information and interrogating it to make a decision. And Gen AI can fast track it because it's able to simplify the information, bring it back to you, get the key points that you want, and make you move fast. So those are the nature of use cases. And I see the question is around how to get first steps. So I don't know, Harsh, if you want to, I'll turn it back to you, I guess, for that question.
Prashant, I think we kind of hit on some of those things. Hopefully, we have answered that question already. I think Ali gave shared some thoughts around starting with the POCs and partnering with the educational institutions. And I think, Prashant, you hit on a little bit of, hey, explore the capabilities as well, right? So I think based on the use cases that you are seeing, Prashant, you shared a little bit about consolidation of information. I think having comfort level with the technology, I think to Kali's point is very important, right? As a technologist, that is key, right? But at the same time, it's also very, very important to be able to look at it from a business impact standpoint, right? So I think that is critical as well. So I think, as you think about first steps, I would say from a governance standpoint, this is a framework that we leverage at Genzeon today when we think about governance, right? So I think we will share this slide with the attendees as well, as these are the various parameters to think about. But I'll go back to, I think, comment both Kali and Prashant made that the governance structures that are in place today, you want to figure out how to leverage those governance structures in context of AI, right? Creating new structures by themselves, in addition, is a more burdensome task. I would say effectively utilizing the governance structures, right? Even organization wise, you have variety of leaders who are responsible for risk, folks who are in healthcare responsible for safety, folks who are responsible for patient-centered design, and sure, you may not have somebody who is responsible, quote unquote, for bias mitigation, but that's where I think addressing governance and control within the systems becomes key as well. But I want to open it up for final comments from Kali, you first, and then I'll go over to Prashant.
So again, this is an easy, like, don't worry about it. Don't be scared. This is not some scary technology. This is just another incarnation of the current technology, so to speak. Use your current processes. Use your current models. Build a proof of concept. Partner with industry leaders. Share the knowledge, and partner with academic institutions. As simple as that. And like it's a think of a nice proof of concept that you can do, and you'll be fine. I mean, I don't think there's anything to be worried about here. That is puts undue burden on yourself.
Thank you, Kali. Any final thoughts, Prashant?
Yeah, I think governance is still developing field for me, right? Because every day there is a new thing in AI, so we are trying to figure out, hey, what are the new governance areas? But the fundamental foundational framework that we have in Genzeon helps, I believe. So again, I feel this is a really exciting time, because new boundaries are being stretched, and new areas are being uncovered. So again, governance obviously plays a big role, but it's a very exciting time for where the industry is and what all we can do, and everything we discussed, you know top down, bottoms up, decentralized, all those things come into play. And I think really creating that coalition of groups of entities to really drive the governance will be key as we move forward.
Thank you. Thanks, Prashant. Thank you, Kali. This was quite insightful. I appreciate you working with me while I brought in some additional questions that were not necessarily broadly part of our overall agenda, but I hope the audience was open to hearing, your thoughts and knowledge and wisdom. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Certainly, if there are additional questions, I know we touched on one of them, there are additional questions, get back to us, certainly share those questions, and we will respond back in an offline fashion as well. I'll take on that responsibility. I do want to thank our esteemed panel here for spending the time with all of us to share about why we don't need to be scared about AI and Gen AI as we go into the Halloween season this year. So thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for participating. Great talking with you. See ya.
Thank you.